Hey guys, I want to take some time and talk to you a little bit about something called Act 10. Now, those of you in the conservative sphere are very likely going to start hearing about Act 10 a little bit more. Maybe you remember it from 2011 being political, and maybe you're hearing about this for the very, very first time. But it's been a major political point in my state, Wisconsin, pretty much since it was incepted. And I do remember the day that it was incepted. This was back in 2011. I was myself not particularly politically active at the time when this all first came out. But I started to become more politically active very, very shortly after that. And part of it was because of listening to some of the things that were going on about this. So Act 10 was a signature legislation from our former governor, Scott Walker. It limited the collective bargaining power of teachers and certain other state employees who were part of the state employees union at the time, and asked them to contribute a bit more to their pensions. It was a mild reform, but that's not what you would hear coming from many aspects of the left wing, and especially the far, far left wing media at the time. Our left-wing, our Madison Talk radio shows thought that this was going to be the end of the world, that, this was it. We're into the rise of fascism or into the Third Reich. The same kind of bullshit that they always bring up when they talk about this kind of stuff. It was a mild reform. The ask was to have teachers give 3% more into their pensions. Now, at some point, especially being a state employee with the promise that you weren't going to have to put anything into your pension and vacation. Yes, I can see where this is going to become a blow, with the union coming out and promising that they weren't going to do so. But this was one of the things that actually started to push Wisconsin into the level of trying to go back into being the blue state that it once was. Now, I will again admit the fact that I was not as politically active at the inception of the Scott Walker governorship. So I'll regretfully be able to tell you that I don't know what all led up into Scott Walker's election. I didn't sit back and watch this. In fact, he was already the governor when I was starting to pay attention to politics. So what led to his rise into politics, I can't sit back and answer. But this was, they were demonizing this guy right off from the beginning, and looking for any way to try to get rid of him. We had the occupation of the Capitol, which it's so funny to sit there and see some of this stuff, because I know a lot of people in Wisconsin like to compare what happened on January the 6th to what happened at the Capitol. And, the Republicans like to say that, oh, well, what they did at the Capitol was worse. And the left-wing media likes to come back out and say, oh, what they did in Wisconsin, that wasn't anything at all. They weren't smearing their poop all over everything. They didn't do any damage to the Capitol, which is a lie, by the way. It cost millions of dollars to get the Wisconsin Capitol repaired after the left-wing activists occupied it for days and days and days on end. I believe they went for an entire week at one point, just occupying, parading around the Capitol, not allowing anybody in, busting up windows, things like that. They were angry, and it was mostly the teachers' union that came out of this. But as Walker went through, later on, we got a right-to-work law in our state, which was basically the seal on his recall that started off. And I have family members, by the way, who were staunchly against the recall effort, and other family members who went off and bragged about the fact that they signed the petition to go out and get him recalled. So it was a dividing factor in our state, rather. I was about to say country, but no, it was a dividing factor in our state. And I knew right from especially when the right to work thing came down, that Democrats were going to do whatever they could and pull out all the stops to make sure that there was at least a blue governor in this state. To the point of when they pull out the stops and when they say they pulled out the stops, I still to this day cannot believe for the life of me that Ron Johnson became a senator again. I can't even put my mind around the fact that that happened, because so many of the stops were pulled out to try to get this law repealed. Now, fast forward to now, and I've got a couple articles sitting up here in front of me talking just a bit about what happened with this. I'm not going to put them up on the screen like I do on Contemporary, but tune in on Tuesday for Contemporary, where we are going to be looking at some of these on the screen as we go. But fast forward to now, we're sitting in a position where there's been a filing in Dane County that's going up through the county courts first, and then it's going to theoretically go into the state Supreme Court to test the constitutionality through the Wisconsin State Constitution of Act 10. Now, why is this important? Other than the fact that it gives me a chance to say, fuck you, I was right. So this all comes down to a flip of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We are politically in Wisconsin, we're in a position where all of our statewide races are decided by Madison and Milwaukee. Which again is part of the reason that I'm so blown away by the fact that Ron Johnson is still a sitting senator in the state. Number one, he swore up and down he was only going to be a 2-term senator because he stands strongly by term limits. Well, until he sees what his national salary is from the National Senate. It's funny how that little bit of money comes out and, oh no, I suppose we need to keep fighting the good fight after all. It's hilarious how we do this. I didn't vote for Ron Johnson, by the way, the third time. I voted for him the first couple times. I did. I'll fully come out and say that I voted for him the first couple times. I liked what he had to say. You know, term limits. Let's do some term limits here. Let's get some people actually limiting themselves out so they can show us that you can go back to return to civilian life after your term is up, after your term limits are up, and everything is still going to be hunky-dory for you. And I know he pissed a lot of conservatives off when he went back and did that too. There should have been at least a different challenger to come up with this. But we have Governor Evers right now, who was literally picked by Milwaukee. There was honk honk. I don't know if I can even question that election right now, so I don't know if I can describe what happened with that one. But if you look up, I think you can look up absentee ballots, and I don't know how much more I can say. And Governor Evers, and I don't know how much more I can say, and I hope if I break this up that this will get by the YouTube censors. But 2 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know how much more I can say, and absentee ballots, and I don't know how much more I can say, and in a trunk, and maybe I can say a little bit more about a gluing error somewhere, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden now Scott Walker is evicted from the governor's mansion after surviving a recall attempt, which, again, and I was living close to Madison at the time, I was wondering if that was going to actually happen with that. But that's a complete sidetrack to where we're going with this. So we get this done and we fast forward, and now we come up to another major statewide race, the one that evicted Dan Kelly from the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I cannot think of what her name was. It's not Protasewicz. That's the one that knocked him out the last time. I'll look it up after the fact. But Dan Kelly was ousted by a Madison progressive, a judge who came in based on the fact that, and you know, they came out and said the same thing with the advertising campaigns. Dan Kelly he's going to destroy the state. He's a Trump guy, and he was endorsed by Trump the first time. I'm a little blown away by so many people who try to say that he was endorsed the second time by Trump. He wasn't. He was endorsed the first time. He was full-on Trump endorsement at that time. And magically, if you'll remember what happened during the primaries for 2020, which was when Dan Kelly was ousted, Bernie Sanders managed to stay in the race, even though he had no path to victory against Joe Biden at the time. He just got done with the debate. There were not the delegates up there for him, no matter what. But he stayed in the race until all the votes were tallied in Wisconsin after that election day, which was on a Tuesday. And it's in Wisconsin, it's always on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, he suspended his campaign. Do you know why? Because his being in the race brought more people out that maybe had not been fear-mongered in enough to come in because they wanted to go vote. They wanted to cast their vote for Bernie. He's a very popular person in the city of Madison, Wisconsin. And more of them came out. And they cast their vote, and they looked down the ballot, and they said, "Ooh, this Democrat is running against the evil Republican that I heard about on the talk radio. I better vote for her, too." Down the ballot. And I don't think that as many people would have come out to vote for her. I wish I could think of her name right now. I don't think as many people would have come out to vote for her had Bernie not been on the ticket, and Dan Kelly might still be sitting on the Supreme Court right now. But then we come back and fast forward again to another Supreme Court opening, a conservative Supreme Court opening, that came up just this last year. It was an off-year election. I remember it because it was my first time voting in the new part of the state that I just moved to, where our new current Supreme Court Justice, Janet Protasewicz, who has been rife with controversy from the beginning, was on the ballot. Now, and I do remember what was happening with this. This was very open and very obvious what it was that they were trying to do with Protasewicz. Roe v. Wade had just been overturned, and there is in 19th century law on Wisconsin's books that bans abortion. And if I remember correctly, it bans abortion in any case, it's not a 6-week ban or anything. It is a full-on any case abortion. There is a ban there. And Protasewicz was approached and asked under numerous interviews, talk radio spots, podcasts, and a number of other ways for her to get out the vote, what was happening with abortion. And she promised that if the case came forward, she was going to rule that the law in Wisconsin was unconstitutional, therefore allowing the access to abortion. And that's one of the things, it drives the vote, because Dan Kelly, of course, being on the ticket, was sold as the Handmaid's Tale. They're continuing to use that iconography. And I knew at the time, when I looked at this, there were two things that Protasewicz was being brought to the bench to do. And neither one of them had to do with anything with abortion. Janet was brought to the bench, Justice Protasewicz, to overturn new voting laws that had been passed in the state by the state legislature, to overturn some existing voting laws, including signature match, to overturn several municipality laws, and to overturn a decision that pointed out that drop boxes were illegal in this state, which currently they are outlawed, but we'll see what happens coming up in 24. And to take a look at Act 10 to get a challenge for Act 10 up. Now, Democrats were actually smart in the state of Wisconsin. I'm looking strategically at this, and I'm looking strategically at a few things. I look at states like Kansas and Ohio. Those are especially the big ones, where the progressive left is coming out and saying, "Hey, we're coming for your vote right now, and we showed you what we're going to do. We turned out in mass to protect a woman's right to choose to slaughter her child." And we have the amendment passed that enshrines abortion in the Ohio State Constitution. And was it a law or an amendment in Kansas? I don't remember, but it's one of the two. It also enshrines it in Kansas. I believe it is an amendment in Kansas as well that enshrines it, because it would have brought the people out to vote. But those two states kind of shot their wad a little bit early, I thought. Now, Democrats in Wisconsin are smart. They are not going to bring that challenge to the Supreme Court, because there's another Supreme Court seat that's coming up in the near future. And I believe it is a left-wing judge that is up. I'll have to check my details on that. I'll know by contemporary on Tuesday. But I believe this time up it is a left-wing judge that is up. But they're going to use the same fear tactic. Hey, if you let this conservative get on the court, he's going to chain you to the stove. He's going to outlaw abortion. He's going to uphold the law from the 19th century. You are never going to be able to advance your career, and he's going to let your rapist own you. I'm not kidding. That is the kind of rhetoric that they're putting out around these races. But they're never going to bring that challenge because they can turn around and run on it. For the state congressional seats, for the governorship. This is the gift that keeps on giving. The fact that this law was already on the books to begin with. And they can do what Democrats do in classic Democrat fashion. Hey, vote for us. We couldn't do it this last time because of interference from those evil Republicans. Just give us a little bit more power, and we totally promise we'll do it next time. Oh, no, sorry, we got blocked. You didn't give us enough power. You didn't come out in enough masses. Oh, just vote for us again. Give us a little bit more power. We'll do it again next time, we promise. Oh, no. It's evil Donald Trump's fault. You got to come out and vote harder next time and donate more money. Especially donate more money. We need more money. Donate every penny that you have. Otherwise, the evil Republicans are going to win. What's going to be interesting to me, and I know that if any left-winger ever finds this video, they're going to bookmark this because they're going to try to come back and push this back in my face if this does go the other direction. But I do have to wonder where Kansas and Ohio are going to go now that they don't have that wedge issue to run on. And both states becoming redder and redder and redder. Like I said, I think they blew their wads a little bit too early. But as far as Act 10 goes, and why this is such a problem, obviously the voting rights and the ballot boxes, those are big issues for Democrats in the state of Wisconsin. But Act 10, and we can look at some of this stuff here. We can look at some of the statistics. And, our Assembly Speaker is being a complete ass about it. Robin Voss, Republican out of Rochester, Wisconsin, who's telling us he's trying to virtue signal the other way. The repeal of Act 10 would bankrupt schools and local government's rights after we gave them a historic funding increase. Which most of that came from Tony Evers' line item veto, by the way, I'll remind you. This is another attempt by liberal special interests to undo the law, to please their donors. Now that there's been a shift in the court, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. The statistics are in, and since Act 10 went into place, union membership went down. There are a couple provisions in Act 10 that are real sticking points to people who are very, very pro-union, which the union, the AFL-CIO, is one of the biggest funding arms to the Democratic Party. Right to work, which came afterwards, but was put into place because of Act 10, which means that if you work in a union shop, and the union's already established, if you want to work there, you have to join the union. You are legally entitled, or not legally entitled, you're legally required to join that union and pay the union dues. Number 2, it outlawed the practice, which this has always been a big sticking point for unions for me. It outlawed the practice of automatically drawing union dues for members through the company's payroll department. And I've been open about this. I am not opposed to people coming together, putting a little bit of money together, saying, hey, we're going to hire a lawyer, and we're going to make sure that you have to negotiate with us. Because you can't run your company without us. And we want to have your job. So let's work this amicably. I have no problem with people unionizing that way. But do you really think the union is working in your best interest when their entire funding is coming out of your company's payroll department? Think about that for just a moment. That outlawed that practice, but again, for people who are pro-union, that's a problem because people might not pay their union dues if they have to write the check, and a lot of that still goes in the same direction as the taxes. If you see what your union dues are, you start to sit back and question whether or not you can negotiate better, or whether or not your union is doing enough for you when you can see how much it is. Or rather, when you take your paycheck to the bank, if you are still cashing it instead of getting your direct deposit, you only see the number on the front of the check. You don't see any of the deductions. It's the same scheme that they use for income taxes. If everybody in the world, or in the country rather, had to write out that big check at the end of every year, number one, there'd probably be no government funding because so many people would default on it. But number 2, you'd start to see tax reform in a hurry if people actually saw what it is that they're paying in taxes. For the most part, they don't. They look at the check that they get back every year from the government and say, oh, I got this much back from the government. They never see the amount that they pay in, and they never see it on their check either. They just look at the amount that hits on the direct deposit on their screen, and they wonder how it is that they're going to pay the rest of their bills. It's the working class for you. And of course, to go back out and overturn Act 10, which would also bring the idea and the challenge, if they don't come together, to end the right to work law, which is pushing our union membership down because people are realizing what it is that they pay. 3 things that make it harder for the AFL-CIO to fund Democrat candidates. So I'll close on this because I've been going for 20 minutes at this point. When Protasiewicz ran, she was run on the promise that she would overturn Wisconsin's abortion law because it drove out the vote. Because the majority of the millennial Gen Z that they're trying to fearmonger to don't give a good goddamn about the union. Most of them are working in places that are non-unionized, whether it be the corporate world, whether it be the Starbucks, although some of the Starbucks on the West Coast are starting to unionize, that's not happening here, or whatever retail store that they're working in. 3 places that are rarely unionized. Most of them, especially most of the female voters in the state, are not going out and working in the production factories, the warehouses and things like that. There are some of them. God bless them for doing so, but they're not in as big of numbers as the men in our state. So they can sit here and screech about abortion to go and get Janet Protasiewicz installed. And now that she's installed, what is she looking at? Not the abortion law, but Act 10. Just like I told everybody that she was going to do 6 months ago. So I said I wasn't going to say it in the beginning, but I will close the video and say, fuck you, I was right. I told you this is what she was going to do, and I told you why she was going to do this. You can sit and scream about MAGA or Trump or the termination of Roe versus Wade or Dan Kelly or anything else you want to try to blame off this. But this was orchestrated specifically because Act 10 was a problem. And that's where I'm going to close this out here. I mean, I could go back here and start to give Republicans strategy and Democrats strategy, but I know that neither one of them would ever go in the direction that I'm telling them to, in spite of the fact that it would be what would work. So I'll close out here. Take care. Have a good night. And we will see you here on Tuesday for Contemporary. Take care.